So this Canadian cartoonist made this really weird little video about Garfield the other day, and it kind of went viral on Twitter. Maybe you have seen it. If not, let's take another look. Now, I thought this video was pretty clever, but when I was watching it, what also occurred to me was how popular it is to make fun of Garfield. I mean, in addition to this, you have the whole Garfield minus Garfield thing, and that bizarre Garfield video on YouTube, and the whole Lasagna Cat series. It kind of made me realize that, you know, Garfield is like one of the major characters of North American culture. We all know who he is so well that we enjoy seeing weird and creative new things done with the character. It also made me kind of nostalgic. You know, when I was a kid, I was a big fan of Garfield. I'd always take those little rectangular Garfield books out of the library, and so did all of my friends. We'd always read them together at like lunch break in elementary school. I also remember that the woman who ran the daycare that I used to go to was really big into all of that sort of schlocky Garfield merchandise that a certain sort of middle-class woman is very fond of. You know, like posters where Garfield is complaining about not having enough coffee, or mugs where he's making some snarky comment about the state of humanity. Do you have any Garfield memories if you live in North America? I bet you do. Then I got to thinking, how many other cartoon characters have like the same level of presence in our culture? I'm pretty interested in questions of culture and how exactly you measure it. And in that respect, I think cartoon characters can be almost as important as like food or sports or holidays. So when it comes to the essential cartoon characters of North American culture, here are a few I came up with. The big one is obviously Mickey Mouse. Mickey Mouse is obviously the one cartoon character that like everybody knows, but it's interesting if you try to think about what your own interactions with that character have been. So for me, Mickey Mouse cartoons were not really on television when I was a child, but we would always watch Mickey's Christmas Carol every Christmas. I was a real big fan of that one. My primary interactions with Mickey was always mostly through like children's books and things. There was a lot of Mickey Mouse picture books when I was growing up. Oh yes, and Mickey's Magical Quest for the SNES. That was like the hot game of 1993. They even put it on the cover of Nintendo Power. But you know, I also remember Mickey Mouse as being sort of the first cartoon character that I remember adults making fun of in this kind of nasty way. In the 1990s, Mickey Mouse was a very popular character for sort of like the anti-capitalist left to make fun of. So I remember there being a lot of like dead Mickey and evil Mickey stuff going around. I can actually remember being somewhat traumatized as a child when I saw this like R. Crumb cartoon of Mickey Mouse getting it on with like Mr. Peanut. Nowadays, Disney is actually producing Mickey Mouse cartoons again, and they're pretty good. What are your Mickey Mouse memories? Nearly as popular as Mickey is Snoopy, the beloved Charlie Brown dog. I grew up at a time when new Charlie Brown comics were still being published in the newspaper. I remember when Charles Schultz died, and that was like a big deal. But overall, I was never super duper into Snoopy. I feel like the comics were always a little bit boring, but I mean, obviously my family watched the Charlie Brown Christmas special every year. I feel like that is a good metric for determining how entrenched a character is in American culture. Does he have his own Christmas special? I had some Snoopy toys when I was growing up, but my main Snoopy memories come from my 5th and 6th grade teacher, who was a very big Snoopy fan. She would always photocopy little Snoopy comic strips on our tests and things. Never Charlie Brown, always Snoopy. And it would always be like those comics where Snoopy is typing on his typewriter on top of his doghouse. I think my teacher thought that Snoopy was a good role model because he was so intellectual and always writing or something. But overall, I've always felt like Snoopy is more just the kind of guy that you see on greeting cards and McDonald's toys than the sort of character that anyone has any deep loyalty to as a character. Though I would be curious to know if any of you know a legit hardcore Snoopy fan. Okay, now here's a good one. Superman. The most famous superhero of all time. Considering this guy has been around for 80 years, I do not think it is physically possible to have grown up on this continent and not interacted with this character in some way. Even though Superman is super famous, I also feel like he is kind of polarizing in this weird way. Like, some people really like him, and then some people think that he's kind of boring compared to the other superheroes like Batman and Spider-Man. I mean, Jerry on Seinfeld liked Superman, and he was supposed to be the lamest character, right? When I was in high school, my best friend was a big Superman fan, and I remember thinking he was a little basic for that. He was such a Superman fan, in fact, that he even bought that terrible Superman game for the N64, which is now considered like one of the worst games of all time. When you live here in Canada, you are subject to a lot of propaganda about how Superman is actually Canadian because the guy who invented him, Joe Shuster, was born in Toronto. And we Canadians are not going to allow a small trivial detail, like the fact that he permanently immigrated to the United States when he was 9 years old, put a damper on our patriotic pride. When I was growing up, they used to put these little ads on TV telling you stories about how great Canada was, so I guess the kids would become more patriotic or something. And there was this extremely disingenuous one about Joe Shuster. It showed Joe Shuster as an adult, and then at one point, it had his girlfriend saying very ostentatiously something along the lines of, "Oh, you Canadian kids."
Honestly, you Canadian kids.
Even though there was really like no way that anyone would have considered him a Canadian at that phase of his life. Next up, Bart Simpson. Now, I am a really big Simpsons fan. I always have been. I watch a new episode every time one comes out. Yes, that's right. I am not one of these hipster snobs who is too good for the new Simpsons. When I was little, though, The Simpsons used to be really controversial. Like, a lot of parents wouldn't let their kids watch it. And you have to remember that this was in the early 1990s when the show was at its most tame. There were like no jokes about sex or anything like that. Parents just didn't like the show because Bart was very disrespectful.
What's your name, son?
Well, I'm Bart Simpson. Who the hell are you?
He would sometimes engage in back talk to his parents and teachers. Nothing makes me feel older than when I think about how weird that moral panic was. But another thing that seems weird to think about in retrospect was that The Simpsons was considered so heavily merchandised back in its day, even though by today's standards there was barely any merchandise at all. They had like Bart Simpson's t-shirts and a few crappy video games, and that was basically it. But it was still this common 90s trope to complain that there was so much Simpsons merchandise everywhere. They even made fun of that at the time on The Simpsons.
$18 for this? What a ripoff.
And speaking of overly merchandised characters, lastly, let us talk about Shrek. The fact that Shrek is now like this really big meme character is, I think, another legacy of my generation who would have grown up watching his rise. I remember when the first Shrek movie came out in 2001, and it was considered like this really big deal because it was the first time there was ever a CGI cartoon movie that had sort of more mature humor, and everybody loved it. Here, check out this line from Roger Ebert's 4-star review of Shrek 1. "He is so immensely likable that I suspect he may emerge as an enduring character, populating sequels and spin-offs. One movie cannot contain him." And indeed, it could not. And so the rest of the 2000s was full of more Shrek movies, and Shrek toys, and Shrek video games, and Shrek McFlurries, and Shrek TV dinners. And with each subsequent piece of pointless, money-grubbing Shrek merchandise, the character devolved more and more from his original pretense as this kind of wacky, edgy guy, and towards, well, basically, Garfield. So now I am here at the Walmart, where I thought I would try a little experiment. I figured that since I identified these 6 characters as like the most iconic American cartoon characters, I should surely be able to find some merchandise at Walmart featuring them, considering that Walmart is like the most American of all stores. So let us go in and take a look. Well, right off the bat, we've got some Mickey Mouse sippy cups here. I see we've also got some Mickey Mouse branded diapers. Here in the dog toys, we've got a little Snoopy chew toy. It's pretty cute. We also have a toy of Snoopy's pal Woodstock. Some Snoopy Christmas ornaments here as well, although Mickey is taking credit. I feel like you know you've made it as an American cultural icon when they're making Christmas ornaments of you. Look, here's good old Superman. We've also got some Superman Pixel Pals over here. Pixel Pals are like these little figurines that light up. I've got one of Mega Man in my background. Eagle-eyed viewers might have noticed. We've got a Simpsons calendar over here, and these weird Homer Simpson slippers where you put your foot in his mouth. Well, I guess I was mostly successful. I was able to relatively easily find merchandise for most of those 6 characters. The one that really kind of surprised me a little bit, though, was that I was not able to find anything, and I mean anything, featuring Garfield or Shrek. Like, not a single t-shirt or greeting card or anything. You see a lot more stuff with the Paw Patrol or Frozen or Minions, of course. I kind of feel like the Minions are sort of the new one to watch. I suppose one conclusion that you can draw is that sometimes these characters get a little overexposed, and then people sort of turn off them until you get to the point where the only way that anybody is engaging with these characters anymore is as these sort of ironic symbols of like capitalist excess from a previous decade. So, I am hoping that you guys will leave me some interesting comments about some of these characters. I would like to hear some of your memories that you have about them. which one you liked as a kid, whether you still like them today. And now, to close this video, let us do some viewer mail. Today we have a parcel from my friend Mark from Quebec. He says, "Hi there, JJ. My name is Mark, and I live in Montreal, Quebec. And Mark has sent me a couple of weird things from his province. So the first thing he has sent me is a flyer from the Quebec political party, which is known as Quebec Solidaire. Quebec Solidaire is this kind of very far left party that only exists in Quebec. They are so far left, in fact, that they reject the concept of hierarchy. Instead of having a single party leader, like most Canadian political parties, they have two co-spokespeople, one of whom must always be female. Right now, I see that the woman is named Manon Massy, and the male spokesperson is Gabriel Nadeau-Dubois, also known as GNB. He was a big student protest leader some years ago. You know, Quebec is really quite a foreign country from the rest of Canada. Like, the number of English Canadians that are at all familiar with these people, let alone with this political party, is probably like less than 1%. Mark has also sent me this charming 6th grade Quebec history textbook. I really love textbooks, so I really appreciate this. Mark says, the book actually kind of rewrites history to make the British look bad. I see it as very Quebec-centric. I see on this little map, for instance, it considers Quebec as this thing separate from Canada. And then I see that Mark has also sent me some Canadian Tire money, which is like one of the great artifacts of Canadian culture. I talk a little bit about Canadian Tire money in one of my previous videos about Canadian cultural objects. It is basically just a coupon that you can use at Canadian Tire, which is this very popular hardware store in Canada. People tend to accumulate a lot of Canadian Tire money, but they often don't spend it because Canadian Tire is kind of an awful store. But anyway, thank you very much, Mark, for sending me these cool cultural artifacts. If you want to send cultural artifacts to me, you can just drop me an email and I will send you my mailing address. Perhaps you might even have some cultural artifacts relating to a popular cartoon character in the place where you are from. Although I'd be curious as well to know from our international readers if any of these characters that I've talked about today are well known in your culture. Like if you hear about Snoopy or Garfield or something and you're like, huh, who's that? Although really, I feel like one of the stories about these characters is that they've sort of colonized the world. Anyway, that's all for today. Thank you for enduring this rather unconventional video. I will see you all next week.